Yesterday, I touched on bodhicitta, mind, or as we went through in the discussion afterwards, maybe a chitta literally is something like mind, something mental, but maybe vital energy as a loose translation might be helpful. So bodhi, like bodhisattva, awakening being. Bodhi means awakening. And chitta is mind, or again, perhaps something like the vital energy of awakening. So it refers to an initial determination or decision that we make, like a vow, to practice the Buddha way. But it has many other meanings as well. One famous Mahayana expression is the initial resolve to awakening. In other words, bodhicitta is already itself full and complete awakening. What? Well, it depends on perhaps how seriously you take that initial decision or determination. It really unfolds and opens up. If you really take it seriously, it becomes the way, the path. Now, I guess it was Leon who asked me to return to the matter of Zazen, of sitting Zen, kind of, I guess, Leon, the nuts and bolts, huh? the practical how to. And I mentioned yesterday, you can never go through this too many times. There's always something new you can find out about your own practice. Often it begins with the body and then moves to the breath, and then perhaps the most delicate matter of how to deal with the mind or the mental attitude. This goes back in ancient India to the notion that the physical form was considered the most gross. And then going further to the mind, which was somehow connected with things more subtle and more spiritual. Buddhism, in a way, overcomes that distinction. In a profound sense, Buddhism doesn't look at the mind as some kind of a fundamentally different thing than the body. For example, the 5 skandhas, which includes the body and the mind. These are just 5 bundles of things tangled together. The mind is not something that continues to exist like some kind of an Atman or absolute reality. And the body is not simply some gross physical thing that needs to be subdued, a very common notion in many religions. However, Gautama Buddha, 2,500 years ago, quite naturally, it would be to deal with the physical form, so-called gross physical form first, then the vital energy, the breath, and then the mind itself. For the body, very simply, the essential point is for the back to be naturally erect, not forced, but naturally erect. I suppose we all know from working at the computer hour after hour how your posture can really get kind of messed up depending on what you're doing. And if you're not paying attention, your back gets bent over, your head gets pulled out, your neck is stretched forward, and you start to feel all kinds of aches and pains. I'm no specialist, but I have done some reading, and it seems that the human body is not meant to remain still for long periods of time. What's called sedentary, not moving, staying seated or lying down position for a long time, is not healthy. Again, not me, but specialists who have studied the physical, the human body, compared it with animal bodies, for example, different kinds of animals. It seems that we are made to move. We are made to move. Of course, sitting can be done well and for hours at a time. But if you sit for really long periods, there can be all kinds of physical problems that arise. And many of us know this from sitting in bad chairs or bad posture. So it is very important to have the correct posture, not forced, but naturally erect. Perhaps the thing that I find personally most helpful is to move this forward, to stretch the back by, I'm now sitting in full lotus, but however you're sitting, even if it's in a chair, by first stretching forward all the way down as far as you can go. All the way, let your forehead touch the floor if you can. And then slowly coming up, you can feel the vertebrae, and you allow your butt, your backside, to press down and a little back. That motion naturally, the weight of your body, again, going all the way down as far as you can, comfortably, don't force it, and then slowly coming up. Feel your butt now pressing down and a little back on the cushion. Now your back is naturally erect. It's not like perfectly straight. The butt sticks out a little, it comes in, and then it goes up. When you do it right, you can feel it. It's very different from this, being bent over. Then another thing I find very helpful is to rock gently side to side to make sure that you're not leaning. And then also you can rock a little forward and backwards to make sure that you're not leaning a little bit forward or backward, but straight, erect. Eyes naturally looking down a few feet in front of you. That's what your eyes would do if you're not really searching for something. We don't close the eyes. This is important. If you're interested for more details, years ago, I gave some Dharma talks on the Zazen, the classic Zazen manual, and I went through this in more detail. But in other schools of Buddhist meditation, they have the eyes closed. It's a common Buddhist type of meditations with the eyes closed. Obviously, no problem. However, in Zen, for very good reason, we don't close the eyes, but we don't leave them wide open either, looking around at what's going on. We just naturally leave them half closed, and the eyes just fall a few feet in front of us. We're not looking at anything or for anything, but that's what the eyes would do if we're not actually focusing on them. You look at people in prayer in the church, basically the same thing. We don't close the eyes. There are many things I could mention, but most obviously, if you close your eyes, you tend to wander off, go into a dream world, and so on. So we allow the eyes to be half open. Another very valuable point is then when the Zazen ends and you get up, you are not going from one state to another, which tends to happen if you close your eyes, you see? And then ding, okay, eyes open, back in the world. No, you see? So the eyes are disengaged. We're not looking for things, but we're not closing them off either. We're letting them naturally function. Then when the Zazen period is over, It's just that much easier to continue that meditation, you see? Getting up and doing something, yes. We didn't close our eyes and create a special state. We're still entering samadhi, eventually even very deep dhyana, as it's called, dhyana states, but we don't need to close the eyes. Again, there's more detail in the Zazen manual, and the Dharma talks on that on our website if you're interested. The legs, if you can sit in full lotus, do it. Do it. It works. But if you can't, don't worry about it. Half lotus, quarter lotus, Burmese with your both legs flat, a seiza bench or a cushion on your butt, sitting on your haunches like in the tea ceremony. Sitting in a chair will work, but again, the same principle. Most important, the back naturally erect. You can do the exact same thing in a chair. When you sit down, don't lean against the back of it. About 2/3 into the chair, not leaning against the back, and then bend all the way down and come back up. Legs straight out, feet flat on the floor. Everyone has a different body. So Leon, I'm not going to go into too much detail because we just have to find out for ourselves. Everybody has a different body. You need to respect yours and see how to best adapt it so that you can sit for long periods and sustain Zazen, not torturing yourself, but not trying to be as comfortable as possible. If you just lay down in bed, you will probably fall asleep. So we're doing this, we're sitting in this posture for a good reason. It is the best posture for what we are doing. Staying alert, concentrated. This is, I suppose, for the physical human body, the best possible posture, sitting in full lotus. But again, the main point is that back naturally erect, head straight also, not going forward. Second, the breath. The breath is of vital importance. We are breathing. If not, we're dead. So we've already got it. But the question is, how is the breath being used? Often we're not aware of our breath. We're wandering off into other things. We're thinking about other things. And you can see sometimes people, they have a very, very shallow breath. So this is a conscious way of putting our full attention on something that is always already here, right? The breath. We're already doing it. See, no mumbo jumbo, no philosophy, no religion, no. What we are doing to stay alive. Let's stick with that. The breath itself. But being fully there with it. Not thinking about the breath, but breathing, being fully with the breath. Again, I'll exaggerate now just to make the point. Not forcing it, but taking the energy, the breath that you have. Some people can breathe very deeply, some people can't. It makes no difference. Don't force it, but put the energy you have there, not into thoughts about it and so forth. The breath itself, this most concrete and immediate thing that's always already there. A very good way to enter, you see, rather than going off in your head, thinking about things. Once the body is settled and the breath is getting settled, then the mind, well, it's not really something separate from the breath, but by attuning ourselves with the breath, the mind becomes naturally concentrated. Nothing artificial, just with the breath itself. Being fully there with the breath. And if you read the Buddhist meditation manuals in the Pali Suttas and so forth, they explain, if you're practicing properly, very soon you will experience a kind of a joy, not a sensuous joy, but a joy that arises out of not clinging, for the moment at least, not clinging to anything. Just allowing yourself to be fully there with the breath, neither escaping from anything nor chasing after anything, and just allowing the mind to be there. A feeling of joy will arise, but not a joy connected with some sense experience or some memory or something like that. It's precisely the joy of not chasing after or being chased after. It's precisely the joy of just being fully there. This is the very first stage, so to speak, but it shows, in a sense, that you are going in the right direction. The body, the breath, and then most difficult, most subtle, of course, what do you do with the mind? You may have the body very well settled and even the breath, but still your mind may be going a mile a minute. So this is the real work. How to allow the mind to find its natural focus. Allow the mind to find its natural focus. In other words, not go from one focus. I'm thinking about work. I'm thinking about someone. Okay, now I turn my attention to, oh yeah, my koan. What was it? Or breathing or anything, you see? In the beginning, yes, there's this artificial kind of, we turn our attention from one thing to another. But as the practice deepens, you come to realize, it becomes clear, what you are seeking is what is always already here. But the mind has to come to rest to fully realize that. It's there, it's there. You don't have to get anywhere, in a sense, not even do anything, but to let that mind that is constantly seeking to come to rest. That's why we put the body like this, not to torture ourselves. That's why we breathe like this. And that's why we hold our attention, not in the ordinary sense on from one thing to another. Okay, it's something much more basic and much more fundamental. We can say it's before, prior to a thought arising, mind arising. It's always there, but we're constantly turning it into some thought, some idea. I'll come back to this a little bit later when I talk about amorphous. Amorphous means kind of vague, a word that came up yesterday in practicing how you can kind of be in an amorphous, vague state. As I mentioned yesterday, you see how coming this far, the body, the breath, and the mind, getting them all into one. Totally focused. Then a koan can be helpful. A koan can be helpful there to keep you locked in. But the sitting itself will do if you simply give all of yourself to the sitting. As some of the Pali Sutras, the Satipatthana and the Mahasatipatthana Sutras, the breath itself can be the way. The breath itself is enough. The danger with something like a koan is it can tend to become something that you deal with in your head. You try to figure it out, and then all of this energy starts getting dispersed up in your mind with thoughts about the koan. This has nothing to do with koan practice. The koan must be embodied. It must be the body as well as the mind that is engaging the koan. And finally, the koan becomes this body and this mind. If it's simply something you think about, forget it and just return to the breath. But if there is a genuine koan, something that is really driving you in a true sense, then that can be helpful to keep you locked in a good way. But again, it's not necessary. And if it just becomes some kind of intellectual plaything that you think about, drop it, forget it, and just return to the breath. I trust that's enough of an introduction to the physical breath and mental attitude in Zazen meditation. As I said, the body is not meant to just sit there hour after hour after hour. We have kinhin, walking meditation, for a very good reason. The body needs that. There will be a period, if you really give yourself, where you just will sit through for hours. It's inevitable. But in our day-to-day practice, it should be done in a healthy, helpful way. So yes, sit really good and long for an hour or so if you can. And then get up, stretch your legs, take a walk, do some yoga, something like that. Something that allows you to continue more or less the practice. You don't feel like you're leaving the practice, but simply bringing it out into some kind of a simple movement. And then you can return and sit again. But the body needs a break. The body does need a rest from that posture. So find the right balance. We're not here to torture ourselves, but we're not here to make it as comfortable as possible either. We have a body, there will be pain. If you stand up for 8 hours, it will hurt. So do it in a way that allows you to continue the practice without interruption. So even when you do get up, you realize the sitting is getting up. Yes, the sitting is moving. And now the sitting is moving back to sit again. Speaking of that, why don't we take a few minute break so you can stretch your legs, please. I'd like to return to one of the questions from yesterday. This word amorphous came up, the idea of sitting there for a while and being totally focused, perhaps locked into your koan, but then things can become, as was said yesterday, amorphous or kind of fuzzy and vague. if you're practicing properly, you will get to the point where things lose their hold, lose their form, so to speak. There are these strange terms like the formless world, without form. It doesn't mean there's no form, but that the form itself is not objectified, turned into a notion or an idea or a concept. So in other words, as I mentioned before a thought arises, before mind arises, what is there? What is there? Before your mind starts working. What's there? Everything? Nothing? What is it? What is it? Again, there can be a good sense here in the sense that it is without form. It has not taken on form. I have not turned it into an object. Oh, well, what's here is this room and these people. Some of them I like more than others, and so on and so forth. Prior to all of that, you see, prior to all of that, what is there? What is there? This itself is the fundamental koan, you see. What is there? So there can be a positive sense to saying something, I wouldn't say amorphous, but it is without form. In other words, our mind hasn't turned it into something. It's a common expression, above the saddle, no rider, below the saddle, no horse, which sounds like some kind of a mystical Zen koan or something. The saddle you put on a horse to ride. Above the saddle, no rider. Below the saddle, no horse. What this actually refers to is a master horseman. When you are really a master horseman, above the saddle, there is no one. And below the saddle, there is no horse. When you have mastered it, you see? You see how much this is connected with the practice of Zen. That's what it has to come down to, in a sense. What is the form of the horse? What is the form of the person riding? You see? So again, there can be a good sense to saying it is without form, and yet we can freely use it. The danger, amorphous, if it becomes amorphous, I'm sitting there for a while and I'm really focused, but then things kind of get vague, cloudy perhaps, fuzzy, and so on. This can just be a result of not being able to sustain the samadhi, the concentrated oneness. You need to be able to sustain, continue over a period, and deepen that samadhi, that concentrated oneness. If you're doing it properly, it naturally tends that way. It naturally goes that way. If it becomes vague, see what you're doing wrong and correct it. Are you tired? Have some tea. Splash some water on your face. Refresh yourself. Are you just being lazy and wandering off? Well, bring the mind back. Consciously take a couple of good deep breaths and remember what you are doing here. So again, for the mind to not touch, as it said in Soto Zen, for mind not to touch objects can mean something very, very good. It doesn't turn it into an object. Fully here and yet not objectifying, not turning it into an object for me, simply letting it be fully what it is. And Buddhism would describe that as without form. one of the values of koan practice is, if you're there, your guide may then ask you, show me that form that is formless. Show me that form that is without form. Manifest it. Otherwise, it's probably just a vague dream. This is the value of sustained practice and of proper guidance. Are you simply wandering off into a world of dreams, or are you letting go of everything in a very good way? The sustained practice will show you, sure enough. Keep that single eye clear and open. Don't be deluded by states, mental states, and insights and glimpses and so on and so forth. Let them be what they are, and then just move on. To bring this whole topic today, the theme of today, both bodhicitta and the practical practice of Zazen together, I would like to return to it's a kind of a vow that I wrote for practical application, so to speak. Not the 4 vows, numberless beings set free, but a bit more practical, down to earth, both in terms of practice and in terms of how we are to live our life. Some people, Tina, you're here, huh? Have found this vow quite helpful. I suppose it was a good 10 years ago when I first put it up, but it is there on our website in the Dharma talks on for those who do rouse the doubt. There's one for those who don't rouse the doubt. These are sermons and my commentary. It's a Ming Dynasty Chinese Zen master, Bo Shan. And he has exhortations, kind of warnings, exhortations for those who do rouse the doubt. And in there, I mention this. But Tina, could I ask you just to recite it once, a bit slowly, since many are not native English speakers, and see if you find it helpful, you might take it to heart. Could I ask you to do that, Tina?
I vow here now and for the rest of my life to devote myself to practice. This includes living a wholesome life, being mindful moment to moment, doing daily Zazen and retreats when possible. I will do my best to support the sangha community. I take responsibility for my actions in body, speech, and mind, and for my own health and well-being. I recognize there may be times when I lose heart. Thus, I vow to continue this practice in all earnestness, no matter what.
Thank you, Tina. If any of you find this kind of thing worthwhile, helpful, you might take it to heart, recite it as you wish. I want to leave time, as I did yesterday, for questions, but once again, take a moment. Is your question connected with this fundamental practice? And if it is, make it as clear as you can. as clear and simple as you can. Remember, many of us here are not native English speakers, so it can be a challenge to follow what's going on. Also, if there's something you didn't understand that you want to understand, please feel free to ask. Okay, I hand it over to you, Leon. Thank you all for listening so intently.
Thank you, Jeff. And now that you mentioned that the majority of people, we are not native English speakers, when I upload the videos, when we edit them and upload them to the YouTube channels, you can activate the auto translation on YouTube.
Closed caption?
Yeah, closed caption or auto translation. So if somebody misses some points of the talks, they will be on YouTube. So we are many of us, 52 people. So please, if you have a question, just jump in or send me a direct message. We have good 20 minutes to make questions and answers.
You mentioned when we are well settled in our position and breath and maybe calm our mind, you say a joy arises, a natural joy arises. But many times for me, a sadness arises. What I am doing wrong?
You may not be doing anything wrong, Martha. Do you open up to that sadness and see where it is coming from? Can you embrace it? Maybe something needs to come up, Martha. So this isn't about just sitting there and feeling joy and happiness. There may be things that need to come up. We need to open up to them. So it may not be a bad thing at all. It may be a very good thing, but you do need to let it come and see, what does it say? What does it say? Okay. And if you would like to take this up in online one-on-one later, we can always do that, okay?
Thank you.
I don't have a question as such, but I'd like to make a brief comment about something you said yesterday when you were talking about your first years at the monastery, resisting the pain, running after the bell. And despite all this, you vowed to go on. And you just said, so be it. So I'll sit with whatever comes in, but I will just go on. I vow to go on. And I found that saying, so be it, to be a kind of wonderful reminder in the practice. So I will sit with whatever comes in. I will just go on. I will not expect myself to be perfect in this. I am human, I have failings. So be it. But I will sit where I am, as I am. And that may not be much, but it will be real. Thank you.
Thank you.
Louis, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
It touched me. It was beautiful. And I think I guess for Martha or for any of us, just opening up to what comes up and make it real, be real, no matter what. This is it. It's real. It's here. So thank you so much. It's beautiful.
Jeff, thank you for your talks. You said about koan practice yesterday that it's not suitable for everybody. I understand that. But you also said for some people it's maybe even detrimental. So for the benefit of others, could you maybe comment on that?
Yes. I wouldn't say the koan itself is detrimental, but it can be used wrongly and then it can be detrimental. Let me put it that way. People, I myself, used koans long ago, trying to accomplish something. And in a sense, that's what you're doing, but it can become a plaything, perhaps very serious, but it's really a plaything of the ego. That's why I often speak of the koan in terms of your own koan, not just a formal koan. Again, where did most of these koans come from? At one point, at one time, for a certain person, this was the question that included everything, that brought it all together, you see, naturally, Layman Pang, Who is the one that does not chase after, literally something like that, does not get pulled around by the 10,000 things, by all things? Who is the one free from everything? That's the one I want to know. Who? What is that? Where is it? Where is it? And that became his fundamental koan, so to speak. A bit of Buddhist language in there, but it probably just came naturally out of him as a layperson in the world. Who is, to put it in my own way, who is the one that is free from everything here in the world, here and now? Where is that one? But the koans were so successful that eventually, quite naturally, they started to become codified, and comments were made about them, comments and more comments and more comments, and a whole tradition, literary and also, a literary and poetic tradition developed around these koans, quite natural in China to do that, to laud something with a poem. Yes, it's only natural. But naturally, that also led to a emphasis on that side of the koan as literature, as poetry, something like that. And you can see it throughout the tradition of Zen. Da Hui or Dai, the great Sung Dynasty Chinese master, he was a very great literary figure, but he was also very critical of turning the koans into these kinds of playthings, literary playthings. It's even said that he destroyed the wood blocks to print the book of his teacher's, classic Hekigan-ruk or Blue Cliff Record. His own teacher's, masterpiece. He destroyed it because he found people coming to one-on-one with him and reciting something. Where did you get that? Oh, that was in the book. Oh, okay. So eventually, it is said that he actually destroyed his teacher's work. And it actually seems for about a century, there were no copies, but eventually it was reprinted and now we have this koan text. But thanks for asking the question, because maybe it should be made clear. I wouldn't say the koans are by nature something detrimental, but they can be taken up and abused, used for the wrong reasons. Surfing over the waves with koans. I see a lot of this, not even, I used to say in the West, but I'm afraid it's all over the world now. It's all over the world, where koans have become little more than playthings, perhaps a method for psychological insight. And it can be very good psychology, but not good Zen. So does that help? Again, thank you for asking that question for clarification.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I have a question, Jeff, related to Adam's question.
Please.
I just want to add and about the koan thing, the koan curriculum or practice, that probably it can be detrimental in the cases when you, not you, I'm speaking about myself, or in third person, start to collect the prizes. You answer a koan and then you put a medal like a medal on yourself, and you start to collect achievements. That's one point that way that it can be detrimental, I believe. And the second is that you also, when you answer the questions, probably you start to collect the approval of the teacher. In a way, I try to demonstrate to the teacher how good practitioner I am every time that I answer a koan. And sometimes I can be upset if I'm thinking that I have the right approach to the koan, or the right response, and the teacher is putting me a wall in front and I'm hitting my head against the wall. Okay, can you comment on that?
Yeah, Hakwin was very helpful in trying to bring the koan practice back to life in a sense. It was rather loose, probably up until around his time. There were different books with koans in them, and there are different traditions. Sometimes they use them. In China, they do seem to have been a lot more spontaneous. If you read, for example, the Chan Whip anthology, you'll find the teachers just bringing up a traditional koan or something on their own that's relevant right here. So they seem to have been, perhaps still are, quite free in using these things. Whereas in general, in the Japanese koan curriculums, it is a kind of a curriculum, and you go through one after the other. So perhaps it's a little easier for these problems that you mentioned to arise. But Hakwin himself gives the wonderful example of the monk who was brilliant, and finally his master says, I don't want anything from your learning. All I want is for you to show me your original face before you were born. And this brilliant monk goes through all of his materials, and anything he says, the master says, no, that's just words, words and letters, words from a book. No, that's not your original face. And finally, this monk gets so frustrated that he leaves the monastery. He gives up. And he goes wandering, and he ends up at a memorial for a teacher that died not too long ago. And it's not really well kept up. So he decides, well, maybe I'm just going to keep this place clean. That's maybe where I'm at. I just, my original face, I know everything about, he was brilliant, but I know nothing. So he just ends up cleaning this little memorial site. And one day, as everybody knows, the very famous part of the story, he's cleaning and a stone hits the bamboo and makes a pop sound. And with that, he awakens. He bathes himself, puts on fresh robes, bows in the direction of his teacher and says, if you had given me the answer when I asked you, at one point he begged him to teach him, and he said, anything I said would be mine and not yours. Now that monk understood. He awakened now on his own. So he says, bowing in the direction of his teacher, if you had taught it to me when I begged you to, I would not have had this day. The debt I owe you is greater than the debt I owe my own parents. We have a number of Chinese Americans here can comment on how important the debt to your parents is. But this is even greater than the debt I owe to my own parents. The really interesting part is Hakuin then comments on this classic Tang Dynasty Chinese Zen story. And Hakuin says, in our lineage, we never give a scrap, even the smallest, we never give a scrap of Dharma to our disciples. We never give them a thing. Not because we want to protect the Dharma, but because we want to protect the disciple, the student. When I first read that, I just cried. You see the great compassion in really using koans, not as, little things to tempt people and help give them insights and answers, but rather to stop them in their tracks in a very good way. I don't know if that answers your question, Leon. If not, you can hit me over the head.
Yes, Jeff, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask you something else within the same question. It's not necessary to go over the whole curriculum of traditional, of standard koans to finish the work, right? As we are Westerners, we don't live in a monastery.
I went through the whole curriculum, even the capping phrases, about 20, 25 years I spent doing that. Very few people, even Japanese nowadays, let alone Westerners, are going to be able to do that. You've got to dedicate 20, 25 years of your life to that. But it's not necessary. It's a great curriculum. It's marvelous. I'm forever grateful that I could do that. But it's not realistic. It's not realistic. But the point is, what do you really need? Hakuin himself made it very clear. A couple of really good koans, and you really struggle with them and realize it for yourself. That's enough. He doesn't talk about, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. It was pretty clear. He wasn't really detailed. A generation and a half after him, they really put it into the curriculum that they now are. But obviously you don't need to do all of that. I mean, they didn't have it 300 years ago. And I know people that have been through it, all of it, and they don't have a clue. So I wouldn't worry about that.